Welcome to Unfiltered Reflections. I'm your host, Passion, and today we're going to talk about inheritance. Not the kind that comes with a lawyer's letter and a key to a house you've never seen. We're talking about the other kind, the heirlooms that aren't kept in a velvet lined box, the ones that are tucked away in the marrow of our bones, in the quiet hum of our blood. We're going to meet a man named Elias. And Elias has an inheritance. It's something that has been passed down through his family for generations, from father to son, a legacy as old as the soil his ancestors first unwillingly tilled. It's a gift, or so he was told, a source of strength, of vitality. But as you'll see, some gifts come with a cost so high, they look a lot more like a debt. This is the story of Elias and the seed he was born to carry. Elias Thorne was a man built from good materials. Broad shoulders, a laugh that could fill a room and make the glasses on the shelf tremble, and eyes that held a kindness most people reserved for their own children. He was a landscape architect, a shaper of earth and stone, a man who could coax life from the most stubborn patches of dirt. His hands, calloused and mapped with fine lines of soil, could draw blueprints for parks that felt like cathedrals and gardens that bloomed in defiance of concrete jungles. He lived with Lena, a woman whose love for him was a quiet, sturdy thing, like an old oak. They had a daughter, Maya, who was 7 years old and had his eyes, but Lena's steady heart. Their life, from the outside, was a portrait of hard-won peace. A small, tidy house in a neighborhood where you could still hear crickets at night, the smell of Lena's baking on Saturdays, the sound of Maya's laughter chasing fireflies in the yard. It was a good life. A life Elias had built with his own two hands. But every man has a secret room inside him, and in Elias's there was a constant, low-grade hum, a restlessness that clung to him like the scent of damp earth after a storm. It was a feeling he couldn't name, a deep, ancestral shudder that told him he wasn't doing enough, that he wasn't being enough. This feeling had a physical anchor. In the center of his palm, right where his lifeline was supposed to be, there was a small, hard kernel just beneath the skin. It was no bigger than a watermelon seed, smooth and dark and cool to the touch. He'd had it for as long as he could remember. His father had one too, and his grandfather before him. "It's the heirloom, son," his father had told him one sweltering afternoon when Elias was just a boy. They were sitting on the porch steps, watching the world sweat. His father had held out his own calloused palm, showing the same dark shape embedded in his flesh. "It's our strength. It's the blood of our line. It reminds us we're survivors. It reminds us to be strong, to be providers, to make our mark, to sow, to sow." That word echoed in Elias's mind. As a boy, he thought his father meant planting trees, like they did in their own small garden. But as he grew older, the seed in his palm began to pulse with a different kind of meaning. It had its own rhythm, a slow, insistent beat that was not his own. Sometimes when he was alone, he could feel it thrumming, a tiny engine demanding fuel, demanding growth. The hum grew louder in his 20s. It was a magnetic pull, an invisible current that drew others to him. He was charming, vibrant, a man who seemed to radiate a potent energy. He moved through relationships with a restless grace, always loving, always sincere in the moment, but unable to stay. The seed in his palm would grow warm, and the hum would become a siren song, urging him onward. More, it seemed to whisper. Leave your mark. Spread the roots. Don't let the line die with you. He left a trail of beautiful, brief gardens women he had cared for, women who had loved the man he was in that season, but whom he inevitably had to leave. It wasn't a conscious cruelty. It was a compulsion, a biological imperative that felt as natural and as unstoppable as breathing. Each time he left, a part of him broke. He'd look in the mirror and see a stranger, a man whose actions were not his own. He was just a vessel, a caretaker for this insatiable inheritance. Then he met Lena. With Lena, the hum quieted. Her presence was like a cool balm on his skin. When he held her hand, her warmth seemed to soothe the restless kernel in his palm. For the first time, the demand to sow was replaced by a desire to nurture, to build something that would last. When Maya was born, Elias looked at her tiny, perfect face and felt a profound, earth-shattering love that dwarfed the seed's ancient pull. He held her in his arms, his large hands cradling her delicate body, and he wept. He thought he had finally broken the spell. He thought he had finally built a garden he could stay in forever. For 7 years, he was right. The seed in his palm was dormant, a silent, cool stone. He poured his energy into his work, his family. He designed a playground for the city, a sprawling, imaginative space with winding paths and hidden groves. He called it the sanctuary. He built a life with Lena and Maya that was real, tangible, and deeply fulfilling. He was a father, a partner, a man at peace. But legacies are patient. They wait in the blood. The change was subtle at first. It began with a dream. Elias was standing in an endless field under a bruised purple sky. The ground wasn't soil, it was a writhing mass of black vines, thick as his arm, all stemming from a single colossal tree in the distance. The tree was ancient, its bark scarred and gnarled, its branches heavy with strange dark fruit. From its trunk he could hear a rhythmic, percussive sound, like 1,000 hammers striking anvils. It was a sound of production, of labor, of men being used like tools. He woke up with a gasp, the sheets damp with sweat. The seed in his palm was hot, throbbing with a painful, insistent pulse he hadn't felt in years. The hum was back. It started to affect his work. He'd be sketching a design for a client, a serene Japanese garden, and his hand would betray him. He'd find himself drawing dense, tangled thickets, invasive species, plants that grew with a wild, uncontrollable hunger. His designs became more aggressive, more focused on rapid, relentless growth. His clients, confused, would ask for the gentle, thoughtful architect they had hired. "This feels chaotic," one of them said, looking at a blueprint that seemed more like a battle plan for botanical warfare. The hum followed him home. He'd be sitting at the dinner table, listening to Maya talk about her day at school, and his gaze would drift out the window. The world outside seemed to call to him. The scent of rain on asphalt, the flash of headlights from a passing car, the distant laughter from a bar down the street, it all felt like a missed opportunity, an unanswered summons. The seed was awake, and it was hungry. He started staying late at the office, telling Lena he was on a deadline, but he wasn't working. He was just sitting in the dark, his hand pressed against the cool glass of the window, trying to quiet the frantic thrumming in his palm. He started going for long drives at night with no destination in mind, just following the pull of the road, the hum in his blood. One evening, he found himself at a nursery on the outskirts of town. It was a place he knew well, but he felt like a stranger there. Under the fluorescent lights of the greenhouse, surrounded by the scent of damp earth and budding life, the seed in his palm pulsed with an almost ecstatic energy. A woman was working there, a botanist named Clara. She had kind eyes and a passion for rare orchids. They started talking about soil composition, about root systems, about the delicate dance of cultivation. The conversation was innocent, but the hum in Elias's palm was not. It recognized a fertile ground. It saw an opportunity. "So," it whispered, a hot breath in his ear, "leave your mark." He went home that night, and the lie tasted like ash in his mouth. Lena was asleep, one arm flung over his side of the bed. Maya's nightlight cast a soft, angelic glow from the hallway. He stood in the doorway of her room, watching her sleep, and a wave of self-loathing washed over him that was so intense it made him physically sick. He was a monster. He was a betrayer. He was his father. He was his grandfather. He was a long line of men who built beautiful things only to let a secret, parasitic hunger tear them down. He went into the bathroom and stared at his reflection. His face looked haggard, his eyes haunted. He looked at his hand, at the faint, dark shape under his skin. It was a part of him, fused to his very being. He clenched his fist, his knuckles white. He wanted to cut it out, to take a knife and carve this curse from his body. But he knew it wouldn't work. His father had tried. Elias remembered as a boy seeing the fresh, angry scar tissue on his father's palm. He'd asked what happened. "Just a slip with the pruning shears, son," his father had said, his voice hollow. But a month later, Elias had seen it, a new seed, smaller but just as dark, already forming in the center of the scar. You couldn't cut out a legacy. It just grew back, angrier. The affair with Clara wasn't an affair, not really. It was a series of conversations, late-night texts about fertilizing schedules and pest control, a shared coffee in the greenhouse. But for Elias, every interaction was a profound betrayal. He was living a double life, not of action, but of intention. His body was at home with Lena and Maya, but his spirit, dragged by the relentless pull of the seed, was wandering. Lena knew something was wrong. Elias had become a ghost in their home. He was physically present, but his eyes were always distant, his laughter hollow. He'd hold her, but his touch felt disconnected, his mind a million miles away. "Talk to me, Ely," she said one night, her voice gentle but firm. They were in the kitchen. The scent of garlic and rosemary from dinner still hung in the air. "You're not here. Where are you?" He couldn't answer. How could he explain that he was being haunted by an heirloom? That a piece of his own flesh was commanding him to abandon the life he cherished? How could he say, "I love you, but the ghost of 1,000 generations is telling me to leave"? It sounded like madness. So he said what men like him always say, "I'm just stressed. Work is a lot right now." The lie was a wall between them, and every day it got a little higher. The breaking point came in the form of a phone call. It was a man from a town Elias had lived in a decade ago, before Lena. The man's voice was hesitant. He was calling on behalf of his sister, a woman named Sarah, a woman Elias had loved and left. She's sick," the man said. "And her son, Leo, he's asking about his father." The world tilted on its axis. A son. He had a son. He had planted a seed and never even known it had taken root. The hum in his palm roared to life, a triumphant, deafening crescendo. "See?" It seemed to scream. "This is your purpose. This is your strength." But as he stood there, phone pressed to his ear, he didn't feel strong. He felt hollowed out. He looked through the doorway into the living room, where Lena was helping Maya with her homework, their heads bent together under the warm glow of a lamp. He saw the life he had built, the sanctuary he had cultivated, and he realized the seed's promise of strength was a lie. It didn't build. It only scattered. It didn't create. It only replicated endlessly, mindlessly, leaving a wake of untended gardens. Strength wasn't in the sowing. It was in the tending. It was in the staying. He hung up the phone. He walked into the living room and knelt on the floor in front of Lena. Maya looked up, her expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Lena," he began, his voice cracking, and for the first time he told her everything. He told her about the seed, the hum, the restless pull. He told her about the women before her, not as conquests, but as casualties of a war he'd been fighting his whole life. He told her about the phone call, about Leo. He wept, his body shaking with the force of a confession that had been trapped inside him for a lifetime. He laid the ugly, tangled root of his inheritance at her feet, expecting her to run. Lena listened. She didn't interrupt. Her face was a canvas of conflicting emotions, pain, anger, confusion, but underneath it all, a deep, unwavering empathy. When he was finished, a wreck of a man kneeling on her floor, she didn't run. She reached out and took his hand, his cursed hand. She traced the outline of the seed with her thumb. "So this is it," she whispered, more to herself than to him, the ghost. She looked him in the eye and her gaze was clear. "It's a part of you, Eli. It's in your blood, but it's not all of you. Your hands, they don't just scatter seeds. They build playgrounds. They hold your daughter. They hold me." Healing is not a single event. It's a process. It's a choice you make every single day. For Elias, the choice began with radical honesty. He and Lena talked for hours, for days. They went to therapy, both together and separately. Elias found a therapist who didn't flinch at the strangeness of his story, a man who understood that some wounds aren't personal, they're historical. He spoke of trauma being passed down, of ancestral burdens carried in the body. He didn't call it a seed, but he understood its weight. Elias had to redefine the words his father had given him. Strength, provider, sow. Strength, he learned, wasn't the ability to spread his influence far and wide. It was the fortitude to stay, to be present, to face the discomfort of his own inner world without running. It was the courage to be vulnerable with his wife, to let her see the broken parts of him. Providing wasn't just about a paycheck. It was about providing emotional stability, a safe harbor, a consistent presence. It was about being a father Maya could count on, not just for money, but for guidance, for attention, for love. And sowing. This was the hardest one to reclaim. He made the difficult choice to meet his son. He drove to that town, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The seed in his palm was quiet, strangely so, as if it were holding its breath. Leo was 9 years old. He had Elias's chin and a shy, tentative smile. His mother, Sarah, was frail, but her eyes held no animosity, only a weary sadness. Meeting Leo wasn't about answering the seed's call, it was about defying it. The seed wanted replication. Elias wanted connection. He didn't show up as a buck, a biological imperative fulfilled. He showed up as a man, flawed and late, but willing to be a father. He began the slow, awkward, and painful process of building a relationship, of tending a garden he had abandoned a decade ago. It was the hardest work he had ever done. Back home, he changed the way he worked. He stopped designing chaotic, aggressive landscapes. He started focusing on community gardens, on restorative ecosystems. He taught workshops in underserved neighborhoods, showing people how to grow their own food, how to cultivate life in small, forgotten spaces. He was still sowing, but he was no longer scattering his seed to the wind. He was planting with intention, with purpose. He was teaching others to tend. There were days when the hum returned, a glimpse of a beautiful stranger, a stressful day at work, a moment of loneliness, and the seed would stir, a faint, familiar tremor. But now, Elias had a defense. He had a language for it. He would stop, take a breath, and hold Lena's hand. He would call his son, Leo. He would go and sit in Maya's room and watch her draw. He would ground himself in the life he had chosen, not the one that had been programmed into him. One afternoon, he was in the backyard with Maya. She was 7, almost 8, and she was digging in the dirt with a small trowel, her face smudged with soil. "Daddy," she said, holding something up to him in her small, grubby hand. "Look." It was an earthworm, pink and wriggling. "He's making the soil healthy," she said, her voice full of the solemn wisdom of a child, "so the flowers can grow." Elias looked at her, at this small, brilliant person he had helped create, this beautiful flower in his own, carefully tended garden. He looked down at his own hand. The seed was still there, a dark, silent passenger. It would always be there. It was a part of his story, a part of his history, a brutal, painful history that had been twisted into a biological mandate, but it was no longer in control. It was just a scar now, a reminder not of what he was supposed to be, but of what he had overcome. The hum was gone, replaced by the sound of his daughter's laughter and the gentle whisper of the wind in the trees he had planted himself. He had inherited a cycle of abandonment, a legacy of restless propagation, but he had chosen to build a legacy of presence, of nurturing, of love. He had broken the chain by learning to stay. Elias's story is a fiction, but the seed is real. It lives in the quiet anxieties of men who feel a pull they can't explain. It's in the societal pressure to be potent, to be prolific, to perform a version of masculinity that is both celebrated and condemned. It's the ghost of a time when a man's worth was measured by his physical strength and his reproductive capacity, a dehumanizing valuation that has left deep, invisible scars on the soul. It is the echo of being treated not as a person, but as property, as breeding stock. This burden, this restless hum, is not an excuse for causing pain, but it is an explanation. It's a complex inheritance, woven from history, biology, and the crushing weight of expectation. Healing doesn't mean cutting the seed out. It means understanding its roots. It means choosing every single day to cultivate a different kind of garden, a garden of presence, of accountability, of intentional love. It's about reclaiming your hands not as tools for mindless sowing, but as instruments of tender, dedicated care. It's about breaking the cycle by understanding the legacy of trauma. If you've enjoyed this episode, please visit our website at Deszicakes.com. Thanks for joining me on Unfiltered Reflection. Until next time, be kind to yourself, keep exploring, and remember, you are worthy, you are seen, and you are loved.